In the dim corners where imagination festers, we dissect the anatomy of dread. From whispered legends to engineered scares, every chill has a creator. This is Working the Fright Shift.
Clock into Working the Fright Shift, the gateway between imagination and fear, with your host, Ted Doherty.
Hey everybody, I'm Ted Doherty, and tonight I am joined by the incredible Ken Parks to dissect the architecture of fear. But first, let's crack open the vault of dread in this week's Horror Blueprint.
The Horror Blueprint, the art behind the fear.
Tonight, I'm digging into a debate that has quietly shaped horror for more than a century. Supernatural horror versus psychological horror. Two branches of the same dark tree, each tugging at different corners of our imagination. One whispers, "The world is stranger than you think." The other insists, "The real terror is already inside you." So, which one truly unsettles you more? And why do these two modes of fear continue to define the way that we tell, the way that we watch and experience horror? Well, let's look at the foundation. First off, supernatural horror. It's the oldest form of fear that we have on record. Long before novels, films, or podcasts, people gathered around fires and told stories about spirits, curses, demons, and the restless dead. These tales weren't entertainment, they were explanations. They filled the gaps in our understanding of the world. Film historian David Scull once said, "Supernatural horror is the echo of our oldest anxieties, those we inherited before we had language for them." That idea resonates because supernatural horror taps into something primal, the fear that the universe is governed by forces beyond our control. Let's look at a few prime horror movie examples. Going back to 1980, The Fog. John Carpenter's ghostly revenge tale uses atmosphere, history, and the slow encroachment of the unknown to build dread. Carpenter once said ghost stories are about the past refusing to stay buried. In The Fog, the supernatural is tied directly to a community's hidden sins. The horror isn't just the ghosts, it's the truth they bring with them. Also in 1980, The Changeling. It's one of the most respected supernatural films of its era, and for good reason. It's a story about a grieving composer who moves into a historic mansion only to discover that something inside the house is trying to communicate with him. The film doesn't rely on spectacle, it relies on atmosphere, sound, and the slow revelation of a tragic past. Martin Scorsese once listed The Changeling among the scariest films ever made, calling it a beautifully crafted ghost story built on mood and emotional truth. And I think that's the heart of its power. The supernatural presence isn't just random, it's purposeful. It's tied to injustice, memory, and the idea that the dead sometimes demand to be heard. What about in 2002, The Ring? A cursed videotape, a vengeful spirit, and a countdown to doom. I think what makes The Ring so effective isn't just the ghostly imagery, it's the sense of inevitability. You watch the tape, and your fate is sealed. Supernatural horror often thrives on inevitability. You can't reason with it. You can't negotiate with it. It simply is. Supernatural horror externalizes fear. It gives shape to the unseen. It tells us that the universe is not entirely ours to understand or control. But psychological horror? Well, that's a different kind of darkness. If supernatural horror externalizes fear, psychological horror internalizes it. It turns the lens inward and asks us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. Author Tananarive once said, psychological horror works because it reminds us that the mind is the most dangerous place we'll ever visit. She's right. Psychological horror doesn't need ghosts or demons. It needs doubt. It needs guilt. It needs the quiet suspicion that something is wrong and that the source of that wrongness might be you. So I'm going to explore a few defining horror movie examples. I've already talked a lot about Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in a past episode, and that's a true prime example. But here's a couple different options. 1967, Wait Until Dark. Audrey Hepburn plays a blind woman terrorized by criminals who invade her home. There's nothing supernatural here. Only the terror of vulnerability, isolation, and the fear that your senses may betray you. The film's tension comes from anticipation, not spectacle. Critic Leonard Maltin once described it as a masterclass in suspense built from pure human fear. I think that is why psychological horror often thrives on that simple concept, the idea that the mind fills in the darkness with something far worse than what's actually there. Where supernatural horror says fear the unknown, psychological horror says fear what you already know. Another good example, 1990's Jacob's Ladder. A Vietnam vet experiences hallucinations, paranoia, and a fractured sense of reality. The horror comes from the erosion of identity and memory. Critic Janet Maslin described it as a descent into a private hell. Psychological horror often traps us in that interior space. There was Black Swan in 2010. It's a descent into obsession, identity fracture, and the pressure of perfection. There's no literal monsters, only the monstrous expectations Nina places on herself. The horror comes from watching her unravel. These are just a couple of examples, but you get the idea. But here's where things can get interesting. Fear researchers often divide terror into two categories: external threat and internal threat. Supernatural horror leans heavily on the external, forces beyond our understanding. Psychological horror leans inward, forces within ourselves. So, which one scares you more? I think the answer depends on you. Why supernatural horror terrifies some people more? Because it suggests the world is not what it seems. It removes the illusion of safety. It taps into cultural, religious, ancestral fears. It offers no rational escape route. As Guillermo del Toro once said, the supernatural is the poetry of fear. It's symbolic, mythic, deeply emotional. And for psychological horror, people are terrified by that, maybe because it feels plausible. It mirrors real mental and emotional struggles. It blurs the line between perception and reality. It suggests that the enemy is not out there, but in here. Jordan Peele has said, the scariest monsters are the ones we create ourselves. Psychological horror thrives on that fact. But the real answer? Well, what scares us most is the horror that threatens our sense of control. For some, that's a demon in the dark. For others, it's the mind unraveling. Both forms of horror challenge our stability, one from the outside, one from the inside. The two forms of horror are not rivals. They're collaborators. Supernatural horror gives us scale, myth, and the thrill of the impossible, while psychological horror gives us intimacy, introspection, and the terror of the familiar. And when they intersect, well, think about The Shining, Hereditary, The Haunting of Hill House. I've talked about all those in past episodes. We get stories that linger, stories that feel both cosmic and personal, stories that remind us that fear is not one thing, it's perhaps a spectrum. And together, these variations enrich horror by offering multiple pathways into dread. They allow creators to explore fear from every angle: spiritual, emotional, psychological. and they allow audiences to confront the kind of terror that resonates most deeply with them. Do supernatural stories frighten you because they challenge your understanding of the world? Or do psychological stories unsettle you because they challenge your understanding of yourself? But I think the bigger question is this: if fear is a mirror, what does your favorite kind of horror reveal about you? Think about it. Whatever your answer is, it will always be lurking deep inside the horror blueprint. I've slid out of the horror blueprint where I dissected the mechanics of fear, but now it's time to shift from theory to the architects who build the nightmares themselves. And tonight is one of the greats. Ken Parks' journey begins in traditional theater, where his command of performance, timing, and audience connection laid the foundation for everything that followed. Those instincts carried him to Knott's Berry Farm, where he became a defining creative force, not only for Berry Farm, but for Scary Farm as well, writing, directing, and starring in The Hanging for years, performing across countless shows, and later headlining the event with Dr. Cleaver's Psycho Circus. His influence extended far beyond the stage as he helped conceive and develop the groundbreaking Ghost Town Alive, a project that redefined immersive storytelling in theme parks. As former Vice President of Entertainment at Knott and now Vice President of Creative Development for Corporate Planning and Design at Six Flags Entertainment Corporation, Ken continues to push the boundaries of what themed entertainment can be. Tonight is part one of a two-part conversation with Ken because there was simply too much great material to fit into a single episode. In this installment, we explore his roots in theater, his years shaping The Hanging, and his role in creating the award-winning Ghost Town Alive. It's a chance to step inside the mind of a true innovator, one who has shaped the past, present, and future of themed entertainment as a whole.
Fear Architects, crafting worlds of terror.
Welcome to Working the Fright Shift. Ken, thank you again so much for doing this. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm better now that I'm here with you. You are one of my favorite people, and I am so excited that you are, having your years of experience, getting a chance to talk about that and talk to people that you've worked with. And anyway, I was so excited to be here. So thanks for asking me. It's an honor.
Ken, I feel the same way about you. So this is awesome. Thank you so much. Ken, I have questions for you. Are you ready?
I hope I have answers.
We're going to dive into the world of Halloween. And when you think back to your childhood, what did Halloween feel like for you? Early moments, traditions?
Yeah, well, it always began with going to Kmart and getting a Halloween costume every year, and of course, just putting on, the one year it was the Planet of the Apes, and the next year, once Star Wars came out, it was Star Wars, and so I was a kid who loved building things in the garage and got into trying to build haunted houses very early on. And, they always smelled the ketchup because that's what, we would put on everything. And so there's a lot of, there's just creativity it's always been, it was a time, I grew up in a little small town and in a pretty conservative small town in the Central Valley of California. And so there was always, Halloween always felt like, oh, this is the time that you can kind of express yourself a bit more and you can be creative, and it's okay, right? Everybody kind of accepts it at that time, that it's okay to let your freak flag fly a little bit at that time of year.
I love it. Now, you do have a very long relationship with live theater. What first pulled you onto the stage? How did those early experiences eventually guide you toward theme parks?
I was really, as a kid, just always wanting to put on a show. I don't know where that came from. It was just always from an early age. I just remember, remember walking into, we'd go to visit family and you'd walk into their home and I would immediately, at 5 or 6 be looking around as to what will be my stage? Where will I entertain the family later tonight? Because I've got some new material I've worked up in the car ride over. So that just was in me from the very beginning. What happened was, I went in elementary school, got into wanting to get up in front of the class and putting on shows and writing. I was just constantly writing and doing things that were, creative and fun. And I had a sixth grade teacher who called my mother and said, "You have to do something with him. I can't get him. He doesn't want to pay attention to anything else except when we get to the fun part of creative writing or putting on a show in front of the class. Then he pays attention." So my mother, not knowing, we're not a showbiz family. We didn't have any connection we didn't know anybody in the theater, or she actually reached out to a small community theater that was about 15 miles away and luckily got somebody on the phone who, was just somebody that happened to be there working on a set. And his name was John Leffingwell. And he said, thank goodness, he said, "Well, we don't have anything for him currently, but send him over this weekend. We'll have him work on the set and then he can just help us out. And then, if there's something in the future, he can audition for it." So I did, and John Leffingwell turned out to be this person in my life that just nurtured me and guided me and became a mentor while I was there at the Ice House Theater in Visalia. And that then just once you kind of got a taste of, oh, wait a minute, I'm in this room with adults and we're all doing this together and people seem this is all great and I'm in a room with like-minded people. That was it. I was hooked. And so it just kind of continued on from there. So I just did as many shows there and with other theaters and ended up pursuing went to school and ended up pursuing an acting career. But the whole time also thought, well, I like to direct, and I continued writing as well. So.
Now, for folks who may not know, the Birdcage Theater at Knott's Berry Farm is this smaller, little kind of cozy Old West playhouse. It's modeled after the real Birdcage Theater over there in Tombstone, Arizona. Offers smaller shows, melodrama types of shows. And you spent a lot of time at the Birdcage Theater. So you wound up making your way down to Knott's Berry Farm. Can you talk a little bit about that and performing there and directing there in that space? What did that teach you about your future endeavors?
Well, I was always a fan of the Knotts. We lived 4 hours away, so we would make a family trip to Disneyland maybe once or twice a year, and then Knotts we would always visit Knotts as well. It was kind of in those days like the second gate to Disneyland, and so when my family would go to Knott's, they would want to go on, some of the attractions or do other things. And I would say to them, I'm going to see the shows in the birdcage. I just, leave me there. And so that would be my trip to Knott's, was many times sitting in the birdcage theater and seeing 6 out of the 8 shows that day. And so it had a huge influence on me. And I remember going back home and playing the birdcage theater with my cousins on my grandmother's back porch, and I would always want to play the villain because I thought they were the funniest. They had the funniest lines. So, when there was an opportunity, I had met somebody who had actually worked at the birdcage at one point, and I asked them about that and kind of said, how do you get hired to do that? And they said, oh, they never hire. They haven't hired anybody in years because it's such a great gig. Anyway, through a weird set of circumstances, I ended up calling Knott's and got a recording that said, "Hey, tomorrow we're having an audition." So I went. I was a school teacher at the time. I hadn't been teaching school very long, but I was a school teacher at the time. And I ended up getting a job at the birdcage. And so I had to think about, do I let this guaranteed salary go away, or do I take this chance. And so I took the chance. And the weird part, Ted, is that you watched a lot of these performers when you were a kid, and now you're on stage with them, and then they become your friends, right? And then they're teaching you all of they're passing on their years of experience to you. So, and the first year I had gone to Knott Scary Farm several times in the '80s, so I was well aware of Dr. Cleaver, and that was what they presented. So I got to do that. I think the first year that I did it was in '94, and was Dr. Cleaver, along with other people. We were all in rotation, but it just was exciting. It was exciting to be at this event that you had kind of fallen in love with as a guest, and now to know that you were in some small way a part of it and connected to it. It just was so thrilling.
Well, you were connected in many other ways, including outside the Birdcage Theater, down the way of Schoolhouse Road, The Hanging. All together, it's the longest running show at Scary Farm. And for many, many years, you weren't just writing it, you were directing it, you were starring in it. What was the creative process, and how did you balance satire, spectacle, stunts, and the evolving expectations of the event?
Well, I think, what happened quickly with that is actually it was having the birdcage close. So, the birdcage actually ceased daily operation of the melodramas while I was there. And so that was a moment where I kind of thought, oh gosh, this could happen at any point. I didn't even think about this. I thought I'd be here for 35 years. And so, I managed to kind of go around to the entertainment offices and say, boy, I could write if you need something, or I could direct, or I could, whatever you need, I can do that. And what happened was the hanging had been going for several years. I think maybe you would know this better than I, but 10 years maybe before I was even connected to it.
Mhm.
And Tom Cluft was the person who really originated it into what, and kind of moved it into the pop culture spoof that it became. And so his stuff was always kind of deep and interesting and layered and complicated, and it didn't. Sometimes it didn't quite work with the audience, and so I've always had a comedy background, and so there was a little bit of that of when I was asked to help one year work on it. I thought, well, I'd like to get more laughs into it if we could, and so that was the approach. Out of the 20 something that I did, I'm not sure how many of them you would ultimately say are successful, but they always had moments. And I think that's kind of, as people think about it and look back on it, and, everybody has kind of a favorite moment, and they hold those moments up to everything else. Gosh, somehow, if there was this great set piece or a great moment that happened one year, that then made the rest of the show all of a sudden better in people's memories, right?
Right.
And boy, and I was there sadly long enough to have this experience where someone, when I first was there, someone said, "Oh, gosh, they're not as good as they used to be." And then by the time you got to 20 something of them, somebody said, well, they're not as good as they used to be. And you kind of go, well, I that was me. It was me. Now, it wasn't just me, right? It's all put together with a big team, and I've always been a collaborative creator. I don't have all of the answers, and I love collaborating with people on things. And so it's wrong to say that it's ever been just one person, but they were pretty joyful to do, even when they were frustrating at times. But we tried all kinds of fun things. We did a one year where it was a scratch and sniff hanging, and you'd buy a card and there were smells, that went along with it. And we did one in 3D at one point, and we had one where the audience voted on what we should do. And they were, once again, I like to say I came up with all the stuff you liked.
You did. Yes, say
Oh
that.
no, no, no. I'm responsible for a lot of things. But I was also there the year that we kind of had to say goodbye to it a little bit too, and it just became one of the years that I thought was really funny, and I just thought, boy, that was pretty good. Was then the year that we probably received the most sort of complaints. There was kind of a change in the public and in the group mind. There was a group mind that kind of invaded, and you couldn't win. You couldn't win one way or the other, whether you were on one side of the tracks or the other, kind of in your thinking. You just couldn't ever find a balance there that would appeal and still be kind of edgy and fun. And so it just got harder to do. And so there was a moment where I think the leadership of Knott's kind of said, yeah, well, it's probably time to stop for a while. And so that's what happened. We ended up we ended up killing the hangman and hanging the lawman.
Real quick, I want to jump back to Dr. Cleaver. You performed as Dr. Cleaver all those different years, Birdcage. But in 2004, Dr. Cleaver's Psycho Circus was in what is now referred to as the Walter Knott Theater. So this is the main big stage. What inspired you to take on that stage with that character? And how did that shift let you explore a different side of Halloween entertainment compared to the hanging?
What had happened is I think that, Elvira throughout the years had kind of come and gone and many times not really kind of, well, more often than not, really because Cassandra would want to do it some years and, had other things going. And so it was really about her availability and want to commit to that long of a run. It was, it's having, this, having worked the haunt many years, it's quite a long haul. I remember one year at the Birdcage when someone said they've just upped it to 13 days. How will we, what are they crazy? How will we survive? And, now as you think about all of the talent that works the event and, it gets to 30 something days and
No.
it really is quite a bit of a haul. And especially, that late at night and all
Mhm.
kinds of things. So anyway, what happened was that Elvira, I think one year was not going to be in the theater. And I had said, well, we have our own IP that is here at the park. There might be, and I was just an actor. I wasn't anybody to be listened to. I had said to Charles Bradshaw, you have your own IP. Why wouldn't we kind of create our own little horror host here? And if Elvira wants to come back some year, that'd be great. But in the meantime, we have we have some a commodity that is known, and so that led us to do Dr. Cleaver's Psycho Circus. Frank Maciel and I had worked together on it several times in the Birdcage, and so we were asked to write it for the theater. We had written this show, and then what happened was we presented it to the show director, and we all agreed, okay, we're gonna do this. And because we kind of popped in once in a while, we weren't in any of the dance sequences. We didn't have to come to the rehearsals for a couple of weeks into it. Well, what had happened is by the time we came to rehearsal, they were no longer doing the show we had written. The choreographer had rewritten the whole
Oh
show.
no.
So our bits made no sense. So, we kind of on the fly had to reshift it and redo it. And, it was fun in there. I think I wish it had had a bit of a longer run. It really only had the 1 year. And then I think, I'm not sure if Ed Alonso came back or something. But anyway, it was super fun, and now it's a piece of Scary Farm history.
It sure is.
Oh.
And switching gears, Ghost Town Alive. It's vibrant. It's a living world. What were the core ideas or emotional beats that you wanted guests to experience when introducing that concept of Ghost Town Alive?
Yeah, I had actually been, I had a pretty lengthy career at Disney, working at Disneyland and then doing work with entertainment group there, and then working with the research and development group at Imagineering, and working Asa Kalama and Corey Rouse, and working on some of these alternate storytelling devices and thinking about ways that you might create something that was alive in the theme parks. And so and doing some research on that. So I worked on something called Legends of Frontierland. And one of the things that happened with that was there was a game mechanic that was at the core of it. And I think working on it, the thing that you realize pretty quickly is that the guests would gravitated to the game mechanic, but they really were more into the emotional play of things. They really got excited and moved by those things. So what happened was Ruffy Caprillion called and said, "Do you have anything? We're doing the 75th anniversary of Ghost Town, and do you have anything?" And so I had talked to my partner Corey and kind of said, "Well, this might be something we look at doing there." And so we pitched it, and it was really just about the guest being at the forefront, the guest being the star. I always describe it as it's backyard play. You're playing cowboys in the backyard. It's just that the neighbor kids, in this case our actors, have better costumes. But and the actors in the years that I was connected to it were technique to have it not be about them, to affirm the guests and to listen, and that there was a structure to it, but it was all meant to be able to move and shift based on what the guests were, how the guests were moving the story. And so that, that was really what it was. It was about emotional connection. At the time we were being told that people weren't really staying in Ghost Town much. They were passing through it to go to other attractions. And so the goal was, well, how do we keep them, how do we keep them here longer? And so by the end of the first summer, we had gotten back these reports about how long guests were staying, and we would get lots of complaints from parents who were saying, I bought a ticket to bring my kid and he won't leave Ghost Town, and so, and people, of course, in an area need food and water and souvenirs. And so those sales went up because the people emotionally connected to the play, and that they had agency in it, and they had a place in it, and they came to this place where they felt welcome and they belonged. And so that's something to be proud of, that we had just so many great stories over the years of people, in some cases people on the spectrum, who really started to be verbal, and that maybe weren't verbal before, because they instantly grasped what we were trying to do, right? And everything is played at your level. So it's not really designed for extroverts, it's designed for introverts. The extroverts will put on a funny hat and go with you. It's the introverts that we have to be sort of coaxed into it. Being an introvert, I totally get that. And so everything is played at the level that you're willing to play. And if you want to play more and you feel comfortable, there's another step into it. But and so that's why I think it was successful. And very different for Knott's Berry Farm. They never had anything, although they had something called Ghost Town Alive before. This was a different approach to it.
I've slammed the rusty iron gate on part 1 of Ken's interview. Thanks again, Ken. And for you listening, I hope you enjoyed Ken's insights, particularly if you're interested in learning how to get into this industry, or curious how it's happened for some people, and especially how some of those legendary shows and experiences at Knott's have come to life. In part 2, we're going to get into some of the scare attractions Ken has played a huge role in creating, but that's for next time. But for now, I'm going to share a little bit about a big influence on Halloween theme parks and break down the early lessons and on-the-job moments that taught me how to create Halloween tone, timing, and scares in Echoes of the Past.
Echoes of the Past. The origins of scare experiences.
This is a topic that is near and dear to my haunted little heart. The legendary television horror hosts who paved the way for so many horror lovers out there and has impacted a lot of what I do in Halloween-themed entertainment today. And to kick things off, I have to start with the original Queen of the Night, the one who slinked across the fog-covered floor before anybody else dared to try it. Vampira. Portrayed by Mila Nurmi, Vampira debuted on The Vampira Show in Los Angeles in 1954, running only from April 30th, 1954 to April 2nd, 1955. She would glide down a dark corridor, let out that iconic blood-curdling scream, and then, just as casually as you or I might say good evening, she'd purr, "Screaming relaxes me so." Her show featured vintage horror and suspense films punctuated by her macabre humor, her pet spider Rolo, and her poison cocktail antics. Now, even though the show only aired locally in Los Angeles and for a very short time, it became a sensation. She was featured in Life, Newsweek, and TV Guide within weeks of her debut. She even appeared on The Red Skelton Show and Ed Sullivan's Toast of the Town, a testament to how quickly she became a cultural phenomenon. But here's the thing, Vampira didn't just host movies. Most believe she invented the format. The idea of a themed character introducing horror films hadn't really been done like that before. And once she did it, stations across the country said, "Oh, well, we want one of those." And suddenly, horror hosts were everywhere. Now, after Vampira, the horror host landscape exploded, mostly with men, dudes stepping into the role. And depending on where you lived in the United States, you had your own local ghoul guiding you through the night. You might have grown up with Zachary, the cool ghoul out of Philadelphia and later New York, who brought a mix of deadpan humor and bizarre antics starting in the late 1950s. Or maybe you tuned into Ghoulardi in Cleveland in the early 1960s, who blasted polka music, blew things up on set, and told kids to stay sick. Over in Detroit, Sir Graves Ghastly was serving up creepy sketches and lip-syncing bits from the late 60s all the way into the 1980s. Down in Indianapolis, you had Sammy Terry with his eerie laugh and pet spider George haunting the airwaves starting in 1962. If you were in Chicago, maybe you watched creature features with Jerry G. Bishop, who would later become the original Svengoolie. In Cincinnati, the cool ghoul was cackling his way through the 1970s. In Tampa, Dr. Paul Bearer, claimed to be the longest-running horror host gig in history, was groaning his way through puns starting in 1973. Out west, San Francisco had Bob Wilkins calmly delivering monster movie intros with a cigar in hand. And in Washington, D.C., Count Gore DeVole was pushing boundaries on late-night TV starting in 1973. Now, these hosts were local celebrities, sometimes bigger than the movies they were showing. They were weird, they were funny, they were campy, but they were ours. And they set the stage for one of the most important horror hosts in the history of Knott's Scary Farm. So I have to talk about Seymour, the master of the macabre, played by Larry Vincent. Seymour hosted Fright Night and Seymour's Monster Rally in Los Angeles from 1969 to 1974. His whole shtick was heckling the movies to roast whatever terrible monster or rubber suit creature was lumbering around. But here's where Seymour becomes especially important to us. He was the very first host of Knott's Scary Farm. In 1973, when Knott's launched its Halloween haunt, later named Knott's Scary Farm, Seymour was the inaugural ghost host, appearing live at the event and helping establish the tone of irreverent, horror-based fun that would define Scary Farm for decades. I've written a whole book about that stuff, but his involvement with Scary Farm is astronomical. I don't think the event would have existed if not for him. Not at least the way we know it. He was the bridge between TV horror hosting and live-themed entertainment here in Los Angeles. And that bridge would soon be crossed by someone who would become the most famous horror host of all time. Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, my lady, my favorite of all time. Cassandra Peterson stepped into the role of Elvira in 1981, hosting Elvira's Movie Macabre. Her persona was a brilliant blend of Valley Girl sass, gothic glamour, and razor-sharp wit. She wasn't just introducing movies, she was commenting on them, parroting them, and sometimes outright saving them. Her popularity skyrocketed. By the mid-1980s, she was syndicated across the country, appearing on stations coast to coast. And in 1986, the number one selling Halloween costume in the United States was, yes, you guessed it, Elvira. And of course, she became deeply tied to Knott's Scary Farm. Her first year hosting the event was in 1982, and Elvira became the event's longest-running host, performing many, many years and becoming synonymous with the haunt experience. Her shows were packed, her presence was iconic, and she helped define the identity of Scary Farm for an entire generation. Tons more could be said about her. There's books, endless merchandise. She is the true queen of Halloween, and I will always, always, always adore her. And then we have Svengoolie, who appeared in 1970 under Jerry G. Bishop and then was revived by Rich Koz starting in 1979. Svengoolie brought a mix of parody songs, corny jokes, rubber chickens, and genuine affection for the films he presented. He grew from a local Chicago favorite into a national phenomenon when MeTV began airing his show nationwide in 2011. And today, he's still going strong. So strong, in fact, that he has expanded into a whole team known as the Sven Squad, featuring characters like Gwengoolie, Nostalgia Ferratu, and Ignatius Malvolio Frankenstein. That's a mouthful. Geez. Svengoolie is proof that the horror host tradition isn't just alive, it's thriving. And speaking of thriving, I have to talk about Joe Bob Briggs, the drive-in cowboy who proved that the horror host tradition could survive well into the streaming age. Joe Bob, the creation of writer John Bloom, first hit TV in 1986 with Joe Bob's Drive-In Theater. His whole vibe was part film critic and part good old boy philosopher, delivering his famous drive-in totals before diving into whatever cult classic or cinematic oddity was on deck. Then came Monster Vision on TNT in the 1990s, where he became a weekend ritual for horror fans across the country. After a long break, Joe Bob made a massive comeback in 2018 with The Last Drive-In on Shudder, a return so highly anticipated that the service crashed from the sheer number of fans trying to watch. And a huge part of his new era's success is his co-host, Diana Prince, known to viewers as Darcy the Mail Girl. Darcy brings fandom, humor, and cosplay energy that perfectly complements Joe Bob's dry, Texas fried commentary. And together, they have created a modern version of the horror host experience that feels communal and totally in the spirit of the greats who came before them. Now, here's where all this ties back to my own work in themed entertainment, because when we were developing the Chilling Chambers maze for the 50th anniversary of Knott's Scary Farm in 2023, and the maze was an anthology tribute maze, well, we knew we wanted a guide, someone who could help guests understand the tributes to Scary Farm's past. And naturally, we looked back to the very first host of Scary Farm, Seymour. But instead of recreating Seymour, we created our own variant inspired by Seymour. Something darker, more sinister, more mysterious. And that is how The Keeper was born. The Keeper was the guardian of Scary Farm's history. We made all this up, and he was leading guests through the maze and pointing out the echoes of haunts long ago. He was integrated into the attraction via multimedia throughout the whole thing. And so he was only present that one season, but he was well received on t-shirts and pins and that kind of stuff. But that idea of a character guiding you through the narrative was something we had already explored with Sarah Marshall, the Witch of Origins, The Curse of Calico, another Scary Farm maze. And she wasn't just a villain, she was the architect of the curse, and you walked through the story that she created. And we did something very similar at Valley Fair's Halloween event named Valley Scare in 2023 with the maze Cryptid Land. That one was styled like a roadside attraction run by a twisted character we named Roadside Randy, who collected cryptids, tortured them, and displayed them for paying customers until, well, of course, the cryptids revolted and chaos ensued. Randy was the host of that world, the lens through which guests understood the story. In all three of those cases, The Keeper, Sarah Marshall, and Roadside Randy, we were tapping into the same tradition that Vampira started in 1954. A host, a guide, a character who welcomes you into the darkness and helps you make sense of it. So, as we look back at the legacy of horror hosts, from Vampira to Zachary, from Seymour to Elvira, from Ghoulardi to Svengoolie to Joe Bob Briggs, we see not just entertainers, but storytellers, gatekeepers of the macabre. They shaped generations of fans, they shaped the language of horror, and they shaped creators like me. And thanks to modern icons like Svengoolie and Joe Bob Briggs, that tradition lives on. The rubber chickens are still flying, the bad jokes are still groaning, and the love for scary storytelling is still as strong as ever. Because in the end, horror hosts remind us that the darkness is a little less scary and a lot more fun when someone is there to guide us through it within the echoes of the past. And just like that, the lights dim on another shift. Huge thanks to our fear architect, Ken Parks. Be sure to check out part 2 of his interview in the next episode. Within these stories is the blueprint of fear itself, how we face it, how it transforms us, how we create it, and sometimes how it sets us free. If you liked what you heard, do us a favor and tell a friend to tell a friend. Give us a good review, 5 stars, and help spread the word. Thanks for spending your nightmares with us. I'm your host, Ted Doherty. Beast wishes, and until we meet again, it's officially time to clock out of Working the Fright Shift. Working the Fright Shift is written and produced by Ted Doherty. No portion of this recording may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written and express permission of the producer. All opinions expressed in this recording are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the producer or affiliates. For more details, visit www.workingthefrightshift.com. Copyright 2026, Ted Doherty. All rights reserved.